Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Notebook. This is Marc-Antoine Godin alongside Arpin Basu on November 13. Busy weekend for you, Arpin. You had the Canadiens had two games. A surprising win against Boston and a somewhat, should we say, deflating loss against the Canucks. But it was a bit... it was a very meh game on Sunday.
It was a very meh game. I don't think it was deflating. It wasn't the equivalent. Like if the Boston game equated to the game they played against Vegas, even though they lost that game.
Yeah.
This was not the Canadiens coming out against Arizona totally flat. You know, this was a situation where the Canadiens just got beat and didn't play exceptionally poorly, let's say. I mean, but they were in the game. I thought Martin St. Louis' assessment after the game, where he said he was okay with it and that it could have gone either way, maybe, but it wasn't deflating in that sense. Where as soon as they played the next game in Arizona, that you saw that this team had not actually learned anything and there was no standard set and all that stuff. I don't think the same thing applies. And overall, you know, if anyone looked at the weekend back to back with Boston and Vancouver and said, "Oh, the Canadiens will come out of that with a split," I don't think anyone would have complained.
No.
So I think they mission accomplished as far as that. Plus, if you add the Detroit game in, you know, I'd say the Canadiens are trending upward after a pretty bad downward spiral prior to that.
Okay, so today, speaking of trending upwards, we're going to talk about Slafkovsky, who had a very good weekend, and he seems to be trending upwards. Two guys, actually, two former first-round picks, are standing out. These days, obviously Slafkovsky, but also Canadiens Guhle. So we're going to touch on those two guys. Some news. There are discussions around a new contract for Samuel Montembeault that have started, albeit timidly, but there are talks going on. So we'll touch on that too. We've got our mailbag. I'm very happy because our listeners send us a ton of questions every week, so there's plenty to choose from. I love it.
Yeah, and they're good questions. Yeah. So it's going to take up a lot of time on the show today for sure.
Right, exactly. But first, listen, this is a Hall of Fame day in the NHL. Caroline Ouellette is getting in. Pierre Turgeon, former Canadiens captain, is getting in. And as a shameless plug, I will encourage everybody who can read French to go read the piece that I ghost wrote with Pierre Turgeon. We spent like an hour 45 on the phone together, and we went through his whole career and got his comments on tons of stuff. You know, the Dale Hunter hit, his best years with the Islanders, his time obviously as the Canadiens captain. It's a first person article, but I suggest everybody to go read it.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's also one other guy who's going in the hall who's connected to the Canadiens in certain aspects, and it's Mike Vernon. So
yeah, Mike Vernon's an interesting. First of all, you know, obviously he faced the Canadiens in the Cup final, won the Cup on Montreal Forum ice, which was part of his Hall of Fame, obviously, resume. And so, you know, our colleague Pierre Lebrun had a story out talking about how close Mike Vernon was to being traded to Detroit. Not Mike Vernon. Patrick Roy got traded. Was how close he was to getting traded, or that he was at least in discussions of getting traded to Detroit, which is ironic because that's the team that obviously knocked him out of Montreal with the big win, and would have greatly impacted Mike Vernon's Hall of Fame resume because he wouldn't have been on those Detroit Cup teams that followed, and he had just kind of arrived in Detroit at that time. So that was an interesting little connection, but you have an even more interesting connection between these two guys that I want you to share with the listeners, because this is one of my favorite stories you've ever done, and we've rehashed it many times, but I feel like a lot of our listeners don't know this, and this is the best This is the best Mike Vernon connection to the Canadiens that you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, well, I wrote that in 2015, so that's a long time ago. But yeah, I
still feel enough people don't know this story, though. This has to be spread far and wide.
Yeah,
it's the best.
So I spoke to Mike Vernon for that story, and Mike Vernon said, okay, the details are as follows. So there used to be a restaurant in Montreal, le Casse-Croûte du Coin, Moe's Diner, as it was nicknamed in English. A
Yeah.
lot more people knew it as Moe's Diner. So
Jerry Fleming's mom was a waitress at Moe's Diner. Jerry Fleming, the coach of David Reinbacher in Cloton.
really,
His mother worked as a waitress at Moe's Diner for more than 20 years, the graveyard shift at Moe's Diner.
no way. Oh,
I
that's
swear
great.
to God. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah. So Moe's Diner, or Le Casse-Croûte du Coin, was located, right next door, right in front of the old Montreal Forum. So back in the day, Mike Vernon has been traded to Detroit. He spent the first 9 years of his career in Calgary. He was an Alberta guy, and at some point, he had he had won the Stanley Cup with the Flames. But at some point, the burden, the pressure of being in his hometown and playing for the Flames had become too much. So he asked for a trade to Doug Risebrough, the then general manager. It took a year, but eventually it got done. And now he was playing for the Detroit Red Wings, and the Red Wings are in town. And as a lot of people, a lot of players know, back then the players would go, either the Canadiens players or the visiting teams. They could go and have breakfast before morning skate. That's different era at Moe's Diner. So
Right.
there's nothing like two greasy eggs with plenty of bacon and hash browns before morning skate.
Good hangover cure, for sure.
Exactly.
Many a hangover was cured at Moe's Diner. Yes.
Yeah. So Mike Vernon goes for his breakfast, and as he gets in, he sees Patrick Roy, who's sitting at the counter, just about ready to finish his meal. And Patrick Roy is saying, come here. And so they sit down. They didn't know each other all that well. They had not fought yet. They had faced
Right. Yeah.
they had faced one another. I mean, obviously in the finals, and they had played against each other, but they didn't have a personal connection at the time. So, but obviously they knew each other's face enough. So Patrick Roy says, says, come here, sit down, let's chat. And Patrick Roy was really in a bad mood and in a bad way, and he started saying how pressure had gotten to him and how he was thinking about retirement and whatnot. And Mike Vernon says, I went through this when I was in Calgary, and at some point it got too much, so I asked for a trade. And before you start thinking of retirement and things like that, and thinking that you have, you're done with hockey, you're still young, you had plenty of excellent years in front of you, why don't you ask for a trade? You'll see it'll be wonderful. It's probably the best thing you can do. But the crazy thing is that this breakfast happened on December 2nd, 1995. The very day that Patrick Roy raised his hands, gave up 10 goals, and it ended up being the end of his career in Montreal.
Yes.
So
Did the walk by Mario Tremblay twice to tell Ronald Corey, I just played my last game in Montreal.
exactly, and Mike Vernon was not impressed when I talked to him about that. He was not impressed by the way that Mario Tremblay handled Patrick Roy that night, but because he thought that it was humiliating. So Vernon, that night he felt so bad. He thought, did I trigger something? Did I? It's like in Inception, did I plant an idea in his head?
Right.
And the very same night it turned into this.
Yeah,
So
it manifested itself that way. Yeah.
yeah, so he sort of freaked out, and he said, as soon as the game was over, I changed and I ran to the bus, and I couldn't get out of the building as fast enough, So that's how it happened. So the whole thing, it proves we had different details of how things were, had been simmering and longing between Patrick Roy and the Canadiens, between Patrick Roy and his head coach. But there's that other ingredient that comes from a guy that had nothing to do with the situation, but he's part of the goalie fraternity, had gone through a similar thing and said, "Why don't you get traded?" Well, that idea really made its way in the span of 14, 15 hours, because
Right.
it all came down to a head that very same night. So that's, to me, that's bunkers. And
Yes, it is. And so congratulations to Mike Vernon for your induction into the Hall of Fame. And frankly, had Patrick Roy been traded to Detroit, we would not have gotten the Mike Vernon-Patrick Roy fight. We might not have gotten those crazy Avalanche-Detroit Red Wings rivalries that were so amazing to watch. None of that might have happened. And Mike Vernon might have wound up losing his job to a guy who he recommended asked for a trade. So it would have just so many different things would have happened. But that breakfast, to be a fly on the wall, if we could find the waiter or waitress who served them that morning, that would be a hell of a story. If you're out there and happen to be watching our podcast, I did ask Jerry Fleming if he thought his mom might have been it, and he's like, I doubt it. Not at that time. She worked she dealt with all the kind of the drunken hooligans who came in overnight at the end of their night. But if you're out there listening and you happen to be working that morning at Moe's Diner, please contact us, basuandgodin@gmail.com. I'm serious. I'm dead serious. I would like to talk to you very badly. But congratulations to Mike Vernon and the entire Hall of Fame class. Obviously, Pierre Turgeon, who will be joining the Ring of Honor and will be honored in Montreal prior to the game Tuesday against the Calgary Flames.
Yeah, absolutely.
as coincidence would have it. But back to current day Canadiens matters. And not only that, but future Canadiens matters. I think this weekend, when you look at the weekend, yes, the Canadiens played well, and there were a lot of people that you could look at and say, this guy did this. Obviously the Sean Monahan line continued doing what they do. Sean Monahan himself continues producing, which is kind of also a nice storyline with Calgary coming into town.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that Sean Monahan trade with Calgary a little bit later. But you look at the weekend, and to me, like the two standouts, and not just the weekend, but really the season today, Caden Guhle is taking a step that I think all of us knew he would take. I don't think we knew he would take it right now. The step that he's taking, he has not even played 60 NHL games yet, and he's going into veteran status as far as defensemen are concerned. At age 22, he just turned 22 not long ago. So that's one thing. And then Uri Slafkovsky set a new career high for shots on goal, a new career high for shot attempts, and has been playing significantly better. I thought over the weekend, and I wrote about this last night, but you look at the two games and you look at the stat sheet for the two games against Boston and Vancouver, and it looks like they were two different versions of the player. The Boston stat sheet is largely empty for Slafkovsky. I think he got one shot, handful of shot attempts. Actually, I have it here. I might as well not guess. But didn't really do much in terms of things that get marked on the NHL's event report. And then the next night goes out, 6 shots on goal, 10 shot attempts, new career high in both. And you might think, okay, well, one game he was early on it, the other game he wasn't. Frankly, I thought he was on it both games. And if I had to pick one game where he was better than the other, I would pick the Boston game.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was really, really effective on Saturday night. But, the biggest thing with him, to me at least, and I'll pass it over to you, but his assertiveness and his decisiveness with the puck. And he mentioned after the game on Sunday, he's like, I'm trying to be aggressive before I even get the puck so that I get that extra half second to work with. And you really see it in his play that he's not out there thinking at all, which is when he was kind of going through a bit of a bad phase, particularly in Vegas and Arizona, even against Winnipeg prior to that, even against Columbus prior to that. You could see him sort of thinking on the ice. Nothing was quick.
No.
Everything was laborious. Decisions took too long to make. It was a difficult stretch. Now he's decisive, he's assertive, and he's making things happen. Even when he doesn't register a shot, he's making things happen for his teammates. And so I think the version of the player we saw this weekend, and even against Detroit on Thursday, is a definite step in the right direction, even if he's still sitting on 1 goal and 1 assist in 15 games this season.
Yeah, I think that it's always a difficult balance to to find between being assertive, do not hesitate in making your plays, and at the same time, not rush them and take the time that's at your disposal. Understand that you have time to do that. Slow the game down if need be, like Sean Monahan does so well, and
Mm-hmm.
and create some time for yourself. So this is a tough adjustment, and but I think that he's been prone to more taking too long and getting the puck picked off, or if he tries to pass, it gets stopped, or he tries a shot, it gets blocked. So there's in that sense, I feel as though it's part of a larger adjustment to a guy still trying to find the quickness of or the execution speed that fits the frame of an NHL rink and not European side rink.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I think he said something very interesting after the game yesterday, because he said, in order to give myself some more space and give myself some more time, I understand now that I have to use my strength, use my size to create some space for myself and basically open things up with my size. And that's how, in a more confined space, more confined rink, I'm going to be able to create that newfound
Yeah.
space and time. And I think that's what he's been doing so well lately. Uh,
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily mean hitting guys and plowing them into the boards. It's using his size effectively. Like
yeah,
exactly what you're saying. It's not, and so if you look at the hit counter, I think after the Boston, I think last night, I think he had no hits, but still, he was he was battling in front of the net. He was using his size in other ways. I'll share a conversation I had with a scout during the game last night on Sunday night against the Canucks. I mean, I wrote about it in my piece, but just it's for those who didn't read it. He mentioned how bigger players do take time. So and he said once he gets heavy, he's going to be really good. I was like, what the hell are you talking about once he gets heavy? He's 230 pounds. He's like the 12th heaviest forward. I looked it up. He's the 12th heaviest forward to play an NHL game this season. I'm like, what do you mean heavy? That's ridiculous. It's like, no. I don't mean like heavy is in weight. I mean playing heavy.
yeah.
When he starts to play heavy, then you'll see him be at his best. But that takes time to learn how to do that. And so the process that Slafkovsky is describing is something that NHL people know can be difficult. And when you look at a guy like, say, Chris Kreider, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Benn is another one who needed some time to kind of become who he became eventually. Bigger guys generally need to navigate that and need to figure out the right balance between making skill plays and being a skilled forward and using your size effectively. Like Chris Kreider is not going to go out and kill someone along the board. He might, especially if he's a goalie, but he might get sorry. couldn't help myself. But he's not but he uses his size and his physical gifts extremely effectively without necessarily being a brutal big hitting forward. Like no one would say that Chris Kreider is not a physical forward, but he's not necessarily hitting everything that moves. And I think that's what Slafkovsky, that balance is what he needs to find. And the fact that he's realizing it kind of in real time. I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
was an eye-opening game from him. But again, to me, the Boston game was even better just because of the team they were facing, the way the Canadiens were playing, and the way that he incorporated into that. And so let's see where it goes. Martin St. Louis prior to the game, when I mentioned a time when Slafkovsky was struggled, refused to admit that he had been struggling at any point,
Yeah. I'm
and really
sorry.
didn't like the use of that word. I know, but it's a semantics thing. If I had asked a question, when Slafkovsky was not at his best earlier, what are the differences? I want to know what the differences in his eyes are between the Slafkovsky now and that Slafkovsky that we saw against Columbus, Winnipeg,
Yeah.
Arizona, and Vegas. And he got hung up on the word struggling. So, mental note: if I want to get a useful answer out of Marty, don't use the word struggling. It's a trigger point. He couldn't get past that word, but still used it in my story regardless. So
Well, yeah, for sure, because he did struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, and
I know.
we're not the Montreal
We all
Canadiens
know
coach.
that.
We're not out there to
Yeah.
make sure that he keeps a positive mindset and whatnot. It's just let's tell it as it is. If
Yeah, and that's fine. And it's his prerogative to not want to use that word. That's fine, and that's I have nothing against that. But the fact is that I found his focus on touches during that time when he was struggling was a bit misplaced. This is it had gotten to a point where it's about more than touches, and it was just about his overall confidence and sense of self-worth. And then there were like some really deep kind of psychological issues going on with Slafkovsky that need to be addressed. But now I think you're seeing, and Marty actually said after the game that he's reached the next phase where now he's not only looking at Slafkovsky's touches, he's now looking at what he does with those touches, because he feels satisfied with the number of touches he's getting. And now he's going to start to evaluate, okay, now when you get those touches, what do you do with them?
right.
And whereas last season, and I think probably at the beginning part of this season, Marty said on numerous occasions, but even told me at the draft, he's like, I don't care what he does with the touches, as long as he gets them. So that was interesting to hear him say that he's moved on to another phase, and that's thanks to Slafkovsky looking like someone who is starting to get it.
So his line with Caulfield and Dvorak was the best line against the Vancouver Canucks on Sunday. What do you make of the fact that these two games that seem to signal that he's taking it to the next level, he's played them alongside Christian Dvorak?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a previous episode I mentioned I think the last episode I mentioned how I didn't like that Dvorak was with Caulfield and Suzuki.
Yeah.
Credit to Dvorak, honestly. Like he played two really good games and has looked good, about as good as we've seen him look in a Canadiens uniform. Frankly, I mean it's really, and he does add an element of defensive awareness and presence on that line. Honestly, the worst guy on that line over the weekend was probably Caulfield. Frankly.
Where's Nick? Where's Nick?
Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's and I don't think that's it. I think he doesn't look like a fit with those other two guys. But yeah, if Dvorak can become sort of Slafkovsky's centerman, and they develop some. I talked to Dvorak about Slav, and he was just like, it's just his confidence. He's playing. He's making confident plays, and when he does that, he's a highly effective player. And so we got to work to maintain that confidence. Just a quick sidebar on Cole. Like, how many goals is he going to cost the Canadiens?
Well, he's up
being offside.
He's up to 3 now.
He's up to 3.
That's a lot.
And so that means he's been offside on probably 30 entries this year. I mean, honestly, if he's had 3 goals called back because of Cole Caulfield offsides, how many times does he actually go offside during a game and have it not be called? Like, it's got to be a huge number. So he should probably stop doing that.
He's almost he's offside as often as Thomas Plekanec was back in the day.
Oh yeah,
that's a lot.
That's true.
But 3 goals. I mean, that's 3 goals called back because you're offside for a single player
in 15 games.
Yeah, that's crazy. I honestly have never seen that.
So let's talk a little bit about Guhle before we kind of move on, because I felt like we kind of just brushed over him. Interesting talking to Jonathan Kovacevic before the game on Sunday. His new D partner, Guhle's new D partner. And, Kovacevic and Guhle are both second-year NHL players, but Kovacevic is a wiser NHL player. He's 26. He's been a pro for a lot longer. And so he said something interesting. He's like, 2 things. Guhle's a tremendous skater, but his ability to control that speed, here's a Martin St. Louis, ism coming through. His ability to control that speed is really impressive to Kovacevic. How he's not always going at full blast turbo speed, controls the pace of the game in that way. The other thing that he said really impressed him is the fact that they can come back to the bench and quickly discuss what went wrong or what went well on the previous shift, and he immediately moves on to the next shift. He never lets a bad shift linger. he's like most young players. The bad things will stick with them, and he used a very old timey expression. But with Caden, with Ghouls, it's like water off a duck's back, which is just a hilarious old timey expression.
Yes, I didn't know it existed in English. But
there you go, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's our buddy Guillaume Lefrançois said the same thing right after. He's like, I didn't know that existed in English. So, but anyhow, it's a great trait for Caden Guhle to have. It's not as if he has many bad shifts, which is really what's so remarkable about him, without even a full NHL season's worth of experience under his belt. But when he does have them, and I thought he had a few against Vancouver, he wasn't quite as outstanding in the Vancouver game as he was against Boston, but doesn't let it linger. It rarely turns into consecutive bad shifts as it does for some other defensemen on this team who play on the left side, maybe ahead of Guhle sometimes.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I think, when we talk about young players, we talk a lot about potential, ceiling, and also about floor. And to me, Caden Guhle not only has a very high ceiling, but he's already established that his floor was super high. And it's very exciting to see how, well, if this is the worst that he's going to be, because he's so young and he's just getting used to the league and doesn't have 82 games yet in the NHL. If that's how he's going to be, that's already good enough. But he's shown that he's got, he's got the means and the tools to be even so much better that it blows the mind to think how good this kid can become.
Well, I think his floor was always seen as a high floor pick, right? When he got drafted. It was the ceiling that was the question. It was the offensive ability and everything. And I think that ceiling is starting to rise a little bit.
Well, I think that you mentioned his speed. I think that's something that offensively, he's a guy who can, carry the puck once in a while and come and help the forwards. But his speed really is surprising. The edge tool for that the NHL makes public, with the electronic chips on the puck and on the jerseys. So they record all sort of stuff, and Caden Guhle registered a top speed that puts him in the 92nd percentile in the league.
Right.
So he's not considered. People know that he's a good skater, but to have that number like that proves how he distances himself from the pack. It's quite impressive. So there's that. I think that he's coming into his own in terms of his nastiness. Also, the hits, the physical aspect of the game. I thought that he parked it and decided that he would come back to it once he mastered other aspects of the game. And now, slowly but surely, he gets more and more assertive when it comes to that. And that's another dimension of his game, that when he's going to play a heavy game, as heavy as he can be, when he's 25, 26, I think he's going to be a monster out there. Honestly, to me, it's only a matter of, can he remain healthy? Because if he can, his offensive game will develop. I think he's got untapped potential. It's going to be a matter of opportunities offensively. I'm not sure with all the kids that are in the pipeline right now, whether your Hudsons, your Mayus, your Reinbacher, I'm not sure if he's going to get those opportunities. But if he does, he's going to rack up points. But it's fascinating, and you don't see that too often, especially in Montreal. A defenseman who, even though he spends most of his game either in the defensive zone or in the neutral zone, makes you feel as though he's controlling the game.
Yeah, exactly. And Martin St. Louis, he was asked to give a word to describe what contribution Guhle brings, and he just said stability. It's a 22-year-old defenseman who has an NHL head coach saying he brings stability. And so just on the nastiness thing, I think I've told this story before, but it bears repeating. When I went out west to kind of do a feature on Caden Guhle, I watched him play. He was still playing for Prince Albert at the time. I watched him play in his hometown in Edmonton. And then I went down to watch him play in Red Deer. And Red Deer sort of had Prince Albert's number and had a tendency to kind of push them around a bit, physically sort of take it to them. And they were doing that on this night through 2 periods, and Prince Albert was down in the game 2 or 3-0. I think it was 3-0. I don't remember. I was watching the game with his dad, with Caden's dad, and at one point early in the third period, Caden Guhle just kind of decided he'd had enough, and this poor guy on Red Deer crossed the blue line on his side of the ice, and Guhle just absolutely destroyed him. Like, just blew him up. Like a penalty, like charging, might have been elbowing. There was a lot there. It was a message-sending hit to his team. Like, stop letting these guys push us around. And I was just like, oh my! I looked at his dad. I was like, holy shit! Like, what the hell did he do to that poor kid? And his dad's just laughing. He's like, yeah, Caden has that in him sometimes. And it's like, and that's the thing. He does have that in him, and that's the point. And I've talked to him about that, and I've talked to him about that hit, which Caden, honestly, every time I bring it up, he brushes it off. Like, it really wasn't that big of a deal, man. Like, why do you keep bringing it up? I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. I bet you that kid. I don't even remember his name, but bet you that kid thought it was a big deal at the time because he felt that. But that is an element of, as you mentioned, that is an element that Caden Guhle has that he's been reluctant to bring because he has so much respect for the speed of the NHL game, the elusiveness of players. He said it time and again. He's like, guys just don't skate through the neutral zone and don't skate over the blue line with their heads down. It just doesn't happen. It happens in junior. It doesn't happen in the NHL. So I have to get my timing down. I have to adjust my timing to make hits like that. And it just kind of shows the intelligence of Caden Guhle's game as well. Like, he's not like Arbor Jacki didn't walk into the NHL and say, oh, well, I need to adjust my timing to hit. No, he went out and he's like, I'm going to do exactly what I did in junior, and I'm just going to destroy guys. I'm going to fight guys. And
that's his identity.
That's his identity, and it was effective for him. Great, but he gets caught a lot trying to hit guys and missing. And Caden Guhle did not want that to happen. And he was able to immediately recognize that from his first training camp, where he obviously got cut and sent back. But his training camp last year, he knew that I can't be doing that. I need to be playing a positionally sound game. And once I get the rhythm and pace of this league, then, the little devil on Caden Guhle's shoulder can come out and be like, okay, go wreak havoc. Go inflict pain on your opponents. And that's going to come. And it's going to come, I would imagine, it's starting to come now. I think we saw it a couple of times against Boston. We've seen it a few times this season. But by the end of the season, I think we're going to see it a lot more consistently as he understands his skating and his mobility is an asset where he does not have to fear the mobility of opposing players. He can stay with them, and he can time his hits, and he can get those licks. Yeah. And I think he's starting to feel that confidence now.
I think he's also a prime example of the difference between advanced metrics and the eye test, because I'm sure that people who don't watch Canadiens games will look at the stats and think that he's caving and that things are not going so well for him. You have to watch him to realize how dominant he can be at times and how effective he is. And I think that in this discrepancy will shrink over time, but since he arrived in the league, I see a difference between the two. But
he's actually not caving by advanced stats. This is actually something. He's third on the team in expected goals percentage.
Okay,
and he's behind Armia and Doc. He's at 58.36% this season. So he's doing a lot better than he was
last year. Yeah,
good old Armia. Yeah, he's doing a lot better than last year, and his numbers, his metrics follow the eye test this season quite significantly.
Just a quick note before we move on to another topic. Guhle played 26 minutes in Vegas. That game that Martin St. Louis said was the best game he coached. And then he reached 21 minutes twice in the next 6 games. So there seems to be really...
They were each of the last... They were the Detroit game and the Boston game.
That's right. There seems to be a time management aspect to his usage. They don't... As stable as he is, and as much stability as he provides to this team, there seems to be still all the minutes going in Mike Matheson's direction, and he's being monitored a lot closely. Do you see anything in there?
Well, I think that there's a certain element of game management too. Like, I mean, if they like last night, for instance, Sunday night against Vancouver, I don't know how the minutes played out in the third period. I could check that, but it's when you're chasing the game, I can understand wanting Matheson on the ice over Guhle. That I get. Mike Matheson in the third period last night played 10 minutes. So that's obviously going to eat into Guhle's ice time. Guhle played less than 5 in the third.
Yeah.
So that's situational. I mean, the Canadiens don't play with a lead very often. That's kind of that's sort of the issue. And so the fact he was over 21 against Boston, was over 21 against Detroit, was because they were either tied or leading in those games. And so I think if the Canadiens play with a lead more often, he's going to get more ice time than Matheson for sure. It's late in those games,
right?
But if they need goals, I think Matheson's going to get the lion's share, like we saw Sunday night. I mean, he played half the period. So but I would agree that generally, I think earlier in games, it would be a good idea to start using Guhle more than Matheson. Aside from power play duty, obviously. But at 5-on-5, I think... Listen, Matheson had a great bounce back game in Detroit, but he's still been mistake prone, and Caden Guhle is not mistake prone. He's the opposite of mistake prone. Mm-hmm. Whatever the opposite of prone is, that's Caden Guhle. He's mistake averse, or he just doesn't make mistakes. This is very rare.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, though, because early in the game you might want to send Matheson out there to maximize your chances of getting the lead, so that you don't play. Yeah. Catch up hockey the rest of the time. So,
right. But putting him out there might lead to you playing catch up hockey.
There's
the way things have been going. So it is a chicken and egg thing for sure. But, I think Guhle has shown everything, and actually, frankly, Justin Barron is showing a lot too, even though they got split. I think Barron's been great playing with Matheson. Kovacevic's play has improved. I would imagine anyone who plays with Guhle sees their play improve.
Yeah,
he seems like one of those guys, and so kind of like Monahan up front. But yeah, if I were Martin St. Louis, I would be trying to find ways to get Caden Guhle on the ice a little bit more often than he does. But 21 minutes is fine for him. It's really, or 20 minutes. So, I think he played 20-20 last night, despite playing only 5 minutes in the third. Was it something? Yeah, it was 20 minutes and 20 seconds against the Canucks. Only 5 of those came in the third period, which means through 2 periods he had played 15 minutes, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
so,
hardly any PK time also yesterday, so that factors in. So all in all, an encouraging weekend for Slafkovsky and Guhle. I think that Slafkovsky, we cross our fingers that it's going to keep going in that direction, and it's not just a blip, but it's the beginning of something. But Guhle has been going on a upward trend for a long time, and let's just enjoy watching him take off. So that's what it looks like.
Yeah, no, it's really quite encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to Samuel Montembeault. So you wrote about that. You mentioned the fact that there were at least preliminary talks, but there's been discussions between Montembeault's agent and the Montreal Canadiens. Others have relayed that in the following days after.
It was part of Elliot. It was part of Elliot Friedman's Saturday headlines,
right,
on Hockey Night in Canada. That I think he put it as the Canadiens are making a run at signing Montembeault.
I'm not sure about that.
I don't know if I would qualify it that way. But if making a run means they're talking to his camp, then 100% they're making a run. But making a run sounds like they're very eager to get this done and whatever. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case.
No, me neither. It's been a wait and see approach for quite a while now. And what I find interesting is I think that there are 2 aspects to this contract negotiations that come into play. First is the body of work. Like, okay, so you've shown us that you are getting better year after year. Show us that it can continue this year. But under a 3-goalie situation with starts that are coming not all that frequently, it's harder to prove yourself in those conditions. And the second aspect is regarding his what he will want in terms of his annual
Yes.
salary. And if his demands are above what the Canadiens think that they can allow to this guy, and how they can, how much money they can risk on him, especially when you factor in the length of the contract, because it's one thing to say, oh, you know what, we're going to give you, I don't know, 4 million for 3 years, but 4 million for 5 is a different story. So it's really factoring in both the salary and the duration of the contract. The Canadiens have to be comfortable with that. And the reason I think why there's been a wait and see approach so far, and it's only getting started now, it's trying to make sense of those two aspects. And if they're talking, I think is that there's an openness from the Montembeault camp to be not too hungry in their demands, and make it so that a deal can be made with the Canadiens, because Montembeault has always been very clear to the fact that he wants to stay in Montreal.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, right now, Sam Montembeault has played 85. He started 75 games for the Canadiens, which, is basically a season and a half as a starter's sample, but the sample is not that great. I mean, his numbers, 897 save percentage, 352 goals against over that span. I think the Canadiens need more runway with Sam Montembeault, and you're right to point out the salary demands. I think if you look at Jake Allen's contract, and what he signed, his extension was 2 years at 3.5 a year, somewhere in that vicinity. And there were certain things that the Canadiens were rewarding Jake Allen for, a longer body of work, and just the veteran aspect of him in the dressing room on a young team, him accepting any role that can come, him counseling young players through tough times. There's a lot more than just goaltending that went into wanting to have Jake Allen around. Not to say that Sam Montembeault doesn't provide some of those things, but he's not, he has not been part of a Stanley Cup winning team, even if Jake Allen was the backup. He does not have the long body of work that Jake Allen has. And so, but potentially has a higher ceiling than him. Who knows? I mean, but he's also kind of, relatively late in his career. And while, yes, there is a potential for him to become one of those goalies, one of those middle of the pack goalies who provide adequate goaltending, let's say, or slightly above average goaltending, or even above average goaltending, but not in the elite tier. Coming up with a number is just complicated. It's complicated because of that 75 game sample they're working with, which is only going to grow. It's complicated because Sam Montembeault is not playing as often as he would like, considering his contract situation. When I talked to him about it in St. Louis, he mentioned how, well, this is the first time I've ever had a contract for more than 1 year. So I'm used to that. I'm used to wondering about my contract situation. And I was like, yeah, but you've never been a UFA before. But you've never had UFA status waiting for you at the end of the contract. You were always tied to whoever, you didn't have any leverage. He's like, yeah, that's true. And once you go UFA, you never know what's going to happen. So he wants to stay with Montreal, but I do think the UFA part of it, and this isn't based on anything Sam said, let's just be clear, but when you are about to become a UFA, you can naturally start to wonder, okay, what if there's like some sort of a bidding war for my services? I mean, talk to Jonas Korpisalo about going UFA, and what the benefits of that can be.
Yeah.
It's got to be tempting and tantalizing if the Canadiens are reluctant to meet whatever and I don't know what Montembeault's camp is looking for money wise, but I would guess that if they're looking for something that starts with a 4, that's going to be a tough sell with the Canadiens. It's going to be difficult to get that to the finish line. And so if he absolutely wants that, and again, I'm saying if, I don't know, but if he wants something that starts with a 4, which I think as a UFA is a nice thing to aspire to, whether it's realistic or not is hard to say, but I can see Sam Montembeault, his agent, being like, well, listen, it's not inconceivable if you have a good season this year that we go out on the free agent market and we get you that contract that starts with a 4 in terms of the AAV. Whether he gets it or not is a whole other matter. It's whether he believes he can get it that will complicate this conversation with the Canadiens. And if he's hell bent on getting it, like if he's willing to take a lesser AAV and exchange it for term, maybe the Canadiens go for that. Maybe they give him like a 3 or 4 year deal at a lower number. But I don't think they're going to go mega long term here, and I think the AAV is going to have to stay in a very reasonable place for these contract talks to get to the finish line, because the Canadiens are tiptoeing. I think it's pretty clear that they have certain, I don't want to say reservations because reservations has a negative connotation. They just have certain questions that haven't been answered yet.
Well, that's it. And it's not an environment right now where they can have these questions answered very quickly. And you mentioned Korpisalo. I think he's an interesting comparable for Montembeault. He signed for for 5 years at $4 million a year. But I think, and he had been going, up and down with Columbus for quite a while, having like split duties and whatnot. But he had that end of season with LA when he was really good. The numbers were really good, and it sort of enabled him to go out on the market and get that sort of contract. Same with Ville Husso. Ville Husso's, he's only a year or two older than Montembeault. Had a short life in the NHL. He played, parts of 2 seasons with St. Louis. Second season in St. Louis, his save percentage was .919, and so that when you're just about to become a UFA and you showcase a .919 save percentage in 40 games, well, people will pay attention to what you can do. It's the St. Louis Blues, and they've always done a marvelous job at inflating their goalies' numbers ever since Ken Hitchcock. But for a long time, he fell back. He's sort of come down to earth with Detroit, but he's that short stint, those 2 years in St. Louis, enabled him to get a 3-year contract at $4.75 million. So that's way above what Montembeault can hope for Montreal. But I think that a 3-year deal is interesting, and a 3-year deal below 4 is something that both camps should consider, in my view.
Yeah,
because the thing is,
I think so too.
Because Montembeault, he's still a somewhat average goalie, but he's trending upwards from 1 year to the next. His save percentage is going slowly up. His amount of quality starts also is going up. His goals against average, for what it's worth, is going down. And it's a small sample yet so far this season because he took parts in 7 games, but he seems to be doing better on the PK, which has been an issue with him in the past. And there were no games where, even the 2 where he gave up 5 goals, there were no games where you looked at him and said, yeah, he really doesn't have it tonight, the way like Jake Allen was against Tampa the other night. So there's a fairly consistent aspect to his game so far this season that I find pretty enticing.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't know. I can't handicap how long this is going to take, but I don't think it's imminent. It might be. I might be wrong. I might eat these words, but I think there's going to need to be, I would say, some pretty significant concessions from Montembeault's camp in order to get a contract quickly, because you just mentioned the 2 goalies you just mentioned who benefited from the UFA system. Like the thing about the NHL's system is it is not tailored to goalies at all. The waiver system is not tailored to goalies, and the UFA system is not tailored to goalies. And both of them benefit goalies a great deal. I'm sure Caden Primo would argue that the waiver system is not benefiting him right now, but Sam Montembeault would argue that it did. It helped him, and now the UFA system is helping him as well, because you could argue that he is maybe entering his prime as a goaltender at age 27, well, soon to be 27, and that he can cash in on that potential. Most forwards and defensemen can't say that there's untapped potential in me at age 27.
Yeah.
Whereas Sam Montembeault can make that argument. And whether that's true or not is another matter entirely, but you can, I think, somewhat reasonably ascertain, based on what he's done in his career and how few games he's played, that yes, in fact, there's a lot to come, and there's a lot to like. He's a third-round draft pick. It's not like he came out of nowhere. Like he's pretty high draft pick for a goalie. But we'll see where it goes. But I just think that there's a lot that the Canadiens need to figure out about him, how much money they want to pay him, how much term they want to give him, and whether what we're seeing from him is real. And there's obviously the evidence is mounting. He's having a good season so far. His World Championships performance, his performance last season. But it's not. When you mentioned Korpisalo earlier, like Korpisalo had 8 years in Columbus. He played 210 games with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Like the numbers weren't outstanding.
Work, yeah.
But it's a body of work, then Sam just doesn't have that. So it's gonna be fascinating to see where this number lands. If they sign him to a contract in the next little while, it'll be fascinating to see the number, because I am tempted to believe that if he signs with the Canadiens, Sam will have to be willing to leave potential UFA dollars on the table, and just not take that risk. Because as a goalie, you never know. Like, Korpisalo, you can look at Korpisalo and be like, oh, that looks nice. That'd be nice if I got a contract like that. But you could also just be sitting around without a contract. And it kind of depends year to year how many jobs are available, right? So it's like the UFA calculation for a goaltender is vastly different than it is for a player, because any player who's decent, that there's a team out there somewhere that has a hole that you can fill. You can reasonably expect, even if it's a bad team or whatever, you can reasonably, if you're a legitimate top four defenseman in the NHL, someone out there is going to need a top four defenseman. Whereas if you're a goalie who's like a tandem goalie or borderline starting goalie, how many of those jobs are there? There's basically one per, even if you go two per team, even if you have 64 goalies in the NHL at any given time, maybe 5 or 6 of those jobs are available at any one time. It's like it could be that low.
But so the risk for a guy like Montembeault to go on the market is that, if he gets greedy, other teams would say, well, for that caliber of goalie, I'll find another who will cost me $1.5 million less than you.
Yeah, but you got to bank on, not every team will say that. Like it's.
No, of course. But I mean, the options, there's enough options.
There's always a Pierre Dorion out there.
Yes, that's true. But I mean, he's not going to be the only goalie available in the UFA market. I mean, there's going to be next summer, there's scheduled to be Peter Mrazek, who's really having a solid bounce back season with Chicago. He's really playing well right now. Elias Samsonov, I mean, he's struggling in Toronto, but he's got, I think that he's got a past history that he could be a cheap addition and try to make him like your own comeback story, or whoever wants to give it a shot on this guy. But I still think that he can be a talented tandem goalie in the NHL. Capo Kakkonen, while things are not going too well for him, but Eric Comrie is a guy who can be a second goalie and will for sure be cheaper than Montembeault. So there's always other guys. So you have to be able to prove the year before, the season before you become UFA, that you're better than those other options and that you're going to be the first call that they're going to make. And if it doesn't work, then they're going to call other people. But you have to be at the top of the list. So that's going to be Samuel Montembeault's challenge. And as long as it's not the case, the Canadiens can sit back and feel as though they've got the upper hand in those negotiations.
Well, when you're playing less than 50% of the games,
It's hard.
it doesn't help. Every
No.
time Caden Primo gets a start, I mean, listen, I don't think Sam Montembeault could blame the Canadiens for playing Jake Allen and having basically a 50-50 split between him and Jake. But those two starts by Primo, if you're Sam Montembeault, you're like, I kind of want that start.
Yeah.
I'm a UFA. It's a pretty important year in my career, but it's a pretty important year in Caden Primo's career. It's an added wrinkle to the whole three goalie situation that complicates things for all three guys, basically. And it's all for different reasons for all three guys. But in Sam's case, it's definitely UFA year. And he didn't, he said he's thinking about it a little bit. Like, it's in the back of his mind. It's not overwhelming him. It's not something that he stays up at night thinking about. But it's only natural that you're entering your first UFA year. It's a year that you could really get set with, generational money, really set your family up for a long time. It's normal that you would think about it a little bit, and it's normal that you'd want to be in a situation that allows you to take full advantage of it. And the current situation isn't that for Sam Montembeault. That's clear.
All right, let's move to the mailbag. We've got tons of questions to tackle. We'll try to keep our answers short. That's our specialty.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
That's really what we're known for.
We're almost an hour into this podcast. We're just getting to the mailbag now, but
yeah.
So we'll try and keep it quick. Yeah.
All right. I think you had one from Marie-Pierre Tremblay. Let's start with that one.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the question, Marie-Pierre. Merci. So let's get right into it. I was intrigued to hear other analysts say that the Habs use man-to-man coverage as their defensive strategy and that they might be the only NHL team to do so, as it is apparently very difficult to pull off. First off, is this true? It is not. And if it is, again, not. But how much of it is really man-to-man coverage and how much of it has to do with trying to learn positionless hockey? Martin St. Louis seems to encourage defenders to join the offense a lot, and for this, forwards have to be able to cover their teammates. Also, do you think having Lane Hutson in the pipeline, who, to quote Arpin, came out of the womb preaching positionless hockey? I don't remember saying that, but I'm going to take your word for it. It's a pretty good line, though.
Yeah.
Oh, I did?
Did.
Nice. I like that line. It's pretty good. Might factor in this willingness of the Canadiens to embrace positionless hockey. He might be the Canadiens' biggest wild card, and to bring him in an environment where he'll be able to thrive might be the best way to help him reach his ceiling. What say you to that, Marc-Antoine Godin?
Well, those are two different things. Man-to-man coverage and positionless hockey are two different concepts. Man-to-man coverage is a defensive concept as opposed to zone coverage. So it's when the other team's attacking, how do you structure and defend in your own end? Whereas positionless hockey is an idea of is a way to attack and install your attack so that the way you move the puck and the way you move your personnel around, there are switches in the positions that you occupy and the areas that you cover as a 5-man unit, so that all of a sudden a defenseman can become a forward. But it doesn't mean, hey, let's improvise and let's create chaos and basically do whatever we want. There, it's still very organized. It just needs a read from all the players involved and an intuition and the knowledge of your teammates. I think that that maybe not every player, when it comes to reading the play, not every player has it in the same amount. And Lane Hutson's known for that. But this is primarily the positionless hockey thing is more when you attack. So you have to look at defense as to do teams will play man-to-man or zone. More and more teams will play zone because it's less, the game has gotten so fast that you have to, if you are doing man-to-man, you have to do many switches. And say, well, transfer responsibilities. When you do zone, you can just focus on certain areas. But that, even though the game has gotten faster, there are still quite a bit of teams that play man-to-man.
Yeah, and the Canadiens do play kind of a hybrid version of man-to-man and zone. You'll often see the Canadiens hand players off to each other. So it depends. Sometimes the defenseman will follow his man, all the way up to the blue line. Sometimes you'll hand that guy off to a forward. It's situational. It depends on reads, requires a lot of communication. but it's not a strict man-to-man system in Montreal.
No. Positionless hockey is something that I go back to that term very quickly. It's something that it's not entirely new. It's just that it percolates at the NHL level more and more. But it's something that's been that USA Hockey has been big on for a few years now, and more guys that arrive in the league and young defensemen have grown practicing that style. So it may not be named that way because it might be a bit misleading to do that. But when you hear Martin Saint Louis talk about being balanced on the ice, it's just whoever's in a certain position of the ice, make sure that the other four guys distribute the weight and cover different areas so that the options remain the same and everybody's not loaded on one side and there's a gap on another. So there's got to be that balance, but whether you're a forward or defenseman, it's not as important. You're not holding your ground and holding your position the same way as before. So that's what it is.
Okay.
Listen, Philippe Marceau-Loranger wanted to ask us to explain the conditions on the Sean Monahan trade with Calgary. He said Toffoli, but I'm pretty sure he meant Monahan because the Toffoli trade has been already settled. Obviously, the Canadiens drafted Philippe Michard, but all the crazy conditions were attached to the Sean Monahan trade. You once wrote about this, and it's pretty crazy. It's pretty complicated. Yeah. So enlighten us, please.
Yeah. So this isn't actually. This is the second time we had another questioner. Apologies, I can't find the email, but we had someone else ask last week about this.
Yeah.
And so at the time of the trade, I made a lot of phone calls. I did a lot of digging. I tried to understand this convoluted list of conditions that came attached with this trade. So here's what I wrote at the time. This story is dated August 19th, 2022. So basically right after the trade. So let me know if this is actually better than whatever was written. Well, it is better than whatever was written in the trade, but let me know, Marc-Antoine, if this makes this any more clear.
Okay.
So the conditions are frankly mind-numbing, but here's a rundown. If Calgary's first-round pick in 2024, meaning the next draft, falls between number 20 and number 32, the Canadiens have the option of taking that pick and the trade is closed. If it doesn't, or if the Canadiens choose not to take it, the pick moves to 2025. What complicates matters is the Panthers traded their 2025 first-round pick to the Flames in the Matthew Tkachuk deal with top 10 protection. If that pick moves to Calgary in 2025, and Calgary's own pick is also outside of the top 10, then the Canadiens get the better of those two picks. If Calgary's 2025 pick is in the top 10 and they receive the Panthers' 2025 first-round pick, then the Canadiens get the Panthers pick. In the extremely unlikely scenario that the trade is not resolved by the 2025 draft because Calgary's pick is first overall, which it is first overall protected, and Florida's pick fell in the top 10, there are scenarios where the Canadiens would either get Calgary's third or fourth round pick in 2025 in addition to either Calgary's or Florida's unprotected first round pick in 2026.
I'm dizzy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, first of all, you say the first year if the Calgary finishes between 20 and 32. Basically, if they're it means
team.
They're an elite team. They're a top-tier team in the league, which seems unlikely. But then, if they were to finish them there, the Canadiens would take that pick. If they don't,
they could take that.
Could take it.
Yes. It's not would. It's could.
Could take.
They would have the option of taking that pick if it is between, in this draft, this next draft coming up, if Calgary's first round pick falls between 20 and 32, the Canadiens have the option of taking it. And that would close the trade.
Which means that if the Calgary Flames finish lower in the standings and it's better than the number 20 pick, they don't have that.
They do not have the option to take that pick.
So,
yeah.
Okay, and early, from what we see very early on in the season, it might be a
It is
bit.
not. It is not
It's not
likely.
likely.
It is not likely the Canadiens will have the option. And even if they did have the option to take the pick, it is not likely they would take that option. The way Calgary is trending, they probably wouldn't take it even if they had that option. So
Okay.
they would have a pretty good shot at getting a better pick in 2025.
Right, that's it. But then that pick is that pick. There's a pick that's protected. That's top 10 protected. So then it becomes the best pick outside the top 10 for Calgary, and the pick from Florida. Is that it?
Yes. So in 2025, if Florida's pick is not in the top 10, then they transfer that pick to Calgary. If Calgary's pick is also outside of the top 10, then the Canadiens get the better of those two picks. So let's say Calgary is picking 12th and the Panthers are picking 18th. The Canadiens would get Calgary's pick at 12. If the Panthers are picking 13th and Calgary's picking 21st, the Canadiens will get the Panthers pick at 13th.
So the way that things are going with the team, the Calgary Flames, what we're hearing is that there's all those players that are in need to renegotiate their contract. All the talks have stalled, and basically Craig Conroy and the Flames are reassessing the direction of the team, what they're going to do with this team. So if they go in a rebuild route, it suggests they might not strip everything down right away, but it suggests that they might not be as strong a team next year as they are this year. They could lead into certain years where they might struggle a bit more. So I'm not sure if it would translate into a top 10 pick, but
there's one added layer that needs to be added here is that Calgary's pick is there's a layer of top 10 protection. So if the Calgary 2025 pick is in the top 10, but they receive the Panthers 2025 pick, which is outside the top 10 in that case, the Canadiens would get the Panthers pick. And then it gets to the point where if Calgary's pick is first overall in the 2025 draft and Florida is in the top 10, then it gets into a whole other complicated scenario that is just really not worth even thinking about.
No.
Basically, the Canadiens are going to have, in all likelihood, the Canadiens will wind up with a 2025 pick probably somewhere in the teens.
Yeah.
That's what we're probably looking at here. There's
Just
a whole series of things. Yeah, which is fine, but it's really, I mean, yes, there's all these convoluted parts of the trade. Like if you go to the actual trade document, or the announcement, it'll make your head spin. But if you just think of the Monahan trade will be completed in all likelihood by the 2025 draft, where the Canadiens will either get the Flames pick or the Panthers pick, and it'll probably be somewhere between 11 and probably 20. It's they're getting the better of the two picks, so they're probably getting a pick somewhere in the team.
But if at the 2025 draft the Flames have a protected top 10 pick and they pick top 10, and the Panthers remain a very strong team, there's a good chance that the Panthers could be in the 20s.
Absolutely. And in that case, the Canadiens would get. In that case, the Canadiens would get the Panthers pick.
Yeah, that's less sexy, but okay. Well, this is a long. You know what, guys? We have more than a year to digest that still.
Yeah, but that's the. It might not sound that way, but that's the brief answer to the question. Unfortunately, it took forever.
Yeah.
We had another one from Jean Philippe, who this is an interesting one.
Okay,
it's the label of his email is Schrodinger's Players. So he said the title of this email refers to two players, Christian Dvorak and David Savard, who are apparently good and bad at the same time, like the cat that's both inside and not inside the box. Savard looks like a genuinely good guy, seems to have a good influence on his teammates and to exert some kind of leadership on the team, but by nearly every conceivable defensive metric, he is not a very efficient or even good player at times on the ice. As for Dvorak, cut and paste from the metric part down, I have no sense of that guy otherwise. And yet, those two guys are frequently mentioned not only as potential trade targets, but their absence is bemoaned by nearly every analyst in the community. Can you guys explain this discrepancy or at least address it? What do the stats miss?
Okay, well, when it comes to Savard, I think that the fact that he's an older defenseman in a very young decor makes his absence more obvious. I think that he's a guy who's better equipped to face top lines on the other side than Mike Matheson, for example. He's a guy who's useful on PK. He can play a lot of minutes. He can play physical. He's got a good stick. And honestly, at their respective point in their career, if in a defensive situation, I would rather have David Savard out there than, let's say, Arbor Jackeye. So
Mm-hmm.
some people have an issue with his salary, and it looked as though it was pricey back when the Canadiens signed him because he looked as though he was going in the direction of being like a sixth defenseman. But honestly, because let's remember that he signed with Montreal for $3.5 million a year for 4 years. But honestly,
As a UFA.
as a UFA, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll be paid more than you're worth on the UFA market. That's the nature of the beast. But since then, I would say that he's really earning his salary. He's not a great defenseman, but I think that he's greatly effective, statistically speaking, by the fact that he's constantly starting his shifts in his own end. His missions are strictly defensive, so he's just there to bend but not break.
He's also a great teammate, and that's what you don't get in the numbers is bend but not break. Absolutely. And listen, is he an ideal top four defenseman on a contending team? No. Did the Tampa Bay Lightning, one of the most analytically inclined organizations in the NHL, pay a first-round pick to add him to their Stanley Cup contending team? Yes, they did. There's a reason for that because it's not just analytics. He is he blocks shots. He does all the things that you need to do in the playoffs to win. He's right-handed. He can face difficult opposition, not ideally, but he can do it. He can definitely kill penalties, and he's just a guy that teams need. Ben Sherratt, at the time the Canadiens had him, was a similar type of guy. Was just a guy that teams, and there's a reason why the Florida Panthers gave up a first-round pick to get Ben Sherratt. There's a reason why these guys are valued that go beyond the numbers, that go beyond the metrics, and it's just an intangible part of hockey that's difficult to quantify, but it's there and it's obvious, and people should no longer be surprised. Like the Canadiens at some point are going to put David Savard on the trade market, and teams are going to want to trade for David Savard. I can guarantee it. It's just because playoff teams that intend to go several rounds deep in the playoffs need players like David Savard. Christian Dvorak's a different kind of thing, a different animal. I don't think his metrics are quite as bad as Savard's are, but he's similar in the sense that if you're a contending team who's not entirely satisfied with your depth down the middle as at your third line center position, would you like a guy who can win draws from the left side at a pretty decent clip, can kill penalties, can play on the power play in a pinch, and will not hurt you, definitely will not hurt you defensively, and is able to pitch in offensively from time to time? Like if you were to paint the picture of an ideal third line center on a playoff team, does that not fit the bill? I think it does.
Yeah, it does, except that there's nothing in all the things that he can do that he does very well. He doesn't strike to me as a guy.
You're talking about a third line center.
Yeah, but I mean,
you don't need guys that do things exceptionally well to play on your third line. I mean, yeah, top six. I would argue for sure. You need.
He hasn't.
Well,
yeah, he's been taken. He hasn't played a whole ton of power play since he joined Montreal. He played a bit, but as years went by, he played less and less. I still think that he could be probably one of their best options at bumper, but he's a left-handed shot, so it's a no-go on the first unit. But I mean, in terms, he's a guy also who starts a lot of his shifts. He takes a lot of D-zone draws alongside Jake Evans, so it's useful to spare either Nick Suzuki or Sean Monahan of that. But I think that he would be going back to the question where he said, "Well, why is it that their absence is bemoaned by every analyst. I think that in this particular case, we made such a big deal of Dvorak being gone or not being there was not. It was mainly because of Kirby Doc being injured. Had Kirby Doc being healthy, uh, you could have lived without Dvorak very easily with Suzuki, Doc, and Monahan down the middle. Without Doc, it forces you to have New Hook as a centerman and New Hook potentially as your third line centerman, or instead of using it, maybe as a top six winger. So Dvorak being back, it allowed Martin St. Louis to have more options and maybe have more flexibility around his lineup. But I don't think that what he provides makes him, like a key component of the Canadiens lineup. And honestly, where I was talking about salaries earlier, well, at 3.5, I think that definitely David Savard is a good deal at 3.5, but Christian Dvorak signed with Arizona a 6-year deal that was $4.45 million. And the progression curve that they saw in Arizona did not continue with Montreal. Maybe it's a matter of opportunities, maybe not. But I don't see him at 4.45 million as a guy who's worth his money, because you could replace him by a guy that makes half of his salary and he might be just as effective. So
I disagree. I don't think you can replace him with a guy at half his salary. We're seeing it right now. I mean, we just mentioned how we just played the best games we've seen him play in a Canadiens uniform.
Yeah, but that's
his ceiling is higher than his ceiling is higher, and it's the Canadiens don't have a cap issue. Like it's
No.
The problem will be that when they're trying to trade him, that teams are going to say that. But I don't think third line centers who could do everything that he does at $2 million a year don't grow on trees. You're not finding all the things. What did JT Compher just get out of Detroit? I know that his offensive numbers last year were ridiculously much better than Christian Dvorak's, but it's you look at Dvorak and see that there's offensive ability there, even if the numbers don't necessarily reflect it. Is he worth 4.45? Definitely not. But he is. Yeah, but is he worth working into your salary structure to give you the appropriate depth down the middle that is necessary to advance in the playoffs and do the things that he does that allows you? I mean, he was out there defending 5-on-3s over the weekend. He's a guy who does a lot of things. His face-off ability is his situational hockey benefits are I think would be greatly valued.
Yeah.
Maybe the Canadiens would have to eat like a little bit of his money to get him traded, but I don't think they'd have to eat a significant amount. It's honestly like there's only 1 year left.
It'd be a good fit in Boston.
Of course he would. Be a good fit in a lot of places. Be a good fit in Colorado.
But I bet that Marc Bergevin, when he made that infamous trade with Arizona and gave up a first-round pick and thought that he would replace Philippe Dano with this guy, he probably was hoping that Dvorak had at least a year like JT Compher in him offensively, and so far it hasn't.
Well, and honestly, and it's. I mean, in his 2 years prior to getting traded, he had 18 goals in 70 games and 17 goals in 56 games with Arizona. So it was not unreasonable. It wasn't outrageous to think that, okay, maybe this guy has that in him. So it was a first and a second. It wasn't just a first.
That's
second round pick in 2024. Actually, that's in this coming draft. It's going to complete this trade.
My eyes are bleeding. Okay, let's move on.
One last one. This is the last one. Let's go.
Okay, let's. Do you want to do the Huberdeau thing or the power play thing?
The Huberdeau thing. The power play thing we can actually address really quickly. It's here. Let's just read the email. It'll be a very fast answer because. This was from Tom Law. Do you have any insights regarding the recent success of the power play? They seem to be doing the same thing strategically as the beginning of the year when they were awful. Just puck luck? My take on it is this is born out of familiarity. One thing we didn't see from the power play last year is that every time it seemed to get going, someone would get injured, the power play personnel would change, and they weren't able to create any continuity, any momentum as a unit. This unit, since Doc's injury, has remained the same. There's been nothing changing on either unit. Nothing's changed. Josh Anderson replaced Kirby Doc, has stayed there. And honestly, to my shock, I'm starting to see the benefits of Josh Anderson on the power play. Like he's starting to grow on me somewhat. Even though he's not scoring goals, but he's actually a really good puck retriever on the power play. And like when plays get broken, he tends to be able to extend possession in the offensive zone. So he's not really a scoring threat, but I think he's maybe a facilitator in that way. But my short answer to that question is this is we're seeing the benefit of continuity and chemistry and also creativity from the coaching staff. Not just Alex Burrows, but Martin St. Louis, who has his hands in that power play dough as much, if not more, than Burrows does, of moving guys around. Suzuki will go to the left side sometimes. Caulfield will switch sides. There's not as much of a predictable look that they provide. Mm-hmm. So those are my quick answers to that.
Well, I would add a few pointers. I think that Sean Monahan winning 61% of his face-offs on the power play helps a great deal.
Yeah, but that was true at the beginning of the season, though.
It was, but I think that's true. I've noticed. I feel as though their drop is more effective now, and Suzuki's zone entries are more effective. They don't get stopped at the blue line; they get set better than they were before. Suzuki, everybody's complaining to the fact that he should shoot more on the power play. Well, nobody shoots more than him, so I think that they should continue in that sense because whenever the fact that there was so much focus put on Caulfield early on in the year made him, I remember we discussed that in the previous episode, that made the power play easier to defend because and to cheat on Caulfield's side because there was constantly the pass to try just to feed Caulfield so that Caulfield would be the one shooting. Now Suzuki's shooting a lot more. He's actually shooting at twice the clip of last year on the power play. And it has translated into goals. So if at least the Canadiens can have, those two threats on each side, in each circle, I think that's a good thing. And let's not forget also that the second unit has chipped in every once in a while. They play roughly a quarter of the minutes, but they've played. Yeah, they play maybe 30, 40 seconds on each power play. But you look at the goals for, guys, the top on the first unit has been there for roughly 10, 11 goals. Well, Newhook's been there for 5 goals, Pearson for 4. So that's interesting. That second unit's been helpful too. So you put that in,
Newhook and zone entries is a real dynamic presence on that second unit.
Yeah, but there are nights where he reminds me a little bit of Scott Gomez in the sense that he will cross the blue line, but once he gets there and he puts on the brakes, what does he do? Is there an option there? Mm-hmm. It might be his teammates' responsibility, but I find that once he's got into the zone, do they establish possession or it's quickly out? Because he carries the puck in very, very nicely, but after that, it's what's the next play after that? I think that there's still adjustments to be made there, but it's encouraging. And you mentioned St. Louis, having both hands in the dough. That's true, and I think that as much as people wanted to see Alex Burrows being fired when things were not going well, you have to consider that those same people have to acknowledge that he's part he's partly to thank for the power play going better now. But when things were not going well, there was some Saint Louis issues there too, and I'm sure that fans were not ready to ask for Martin Saint Louis firing either.
Right,
So
exactly.
I think there's familiarity, to come back to your point, is has a lot to do with it, and that's always been Martin Saint Louis' argument.
Yeah, yeah, and it's got some. I think we're seeing that has some merit, whereas last year we didn't really buy it. Okay, last one.
Yeah, that's from Andrew from Calgary, and that's
Yes,
that's what makes it interesting, is because the question comes from Calgary. So
yes.
with the development backlog of forwards in Montreal and the continuing revolving doors of wingers playing with Suzuki and Caulfield, I was wondering what your thoughts are on the struggling Jonathan Huberdeau in Calgary. I know he comes with a Carey Price-like contract, but it seems a pass-first winger with point-producing potential, who was rumored to want to be in Montreal, may be a positive. Moreover, the Canadiens still have contracts to get rid of that could offset the cost. Would a trade of, say, Josh Anderson and Yoel Armia, or Gallagher and Armia for Huberdeau make sense for the Canadiens? Would it make sense for the Flames, who would seem justified just to shed the distraction and contract assumed by previous management? All right, I'll let you go first on that, Arpin.
Yeah, no. It's just a no. It's just, I think it's a no on all accounts. I mean, listen, I don't think, well, yeah, Calgary would want to get rid of that contract. I don't think the Canadiens should touch that contract until Huberdeau proves that he can actually be accountable for his own performances. Listen, I mean, the guy basically was saying to anyone who would listen how Daryl Sutter was not the right coach for that team. The Calgary Flames go out, they fire Daryl Sutter, they hire a new coach, and now that coach is benching him in the third period of games, like in the first quarter of the season. So, could a change of scenery help Huberdeau? Maybe. I would argue that a change of scenery was disastrous for Huberdeau already. Like, we've already seen what a change of scenery does to this guy. Would he be a better fit in Montreal? Perhaps, but the potential for, listen, we saw what Slafkovsky went through a couple of weeks ago when he wasn't playing all that well. We saw Suzuki when he wasn't playing all that well. Little mini storms, but pretty, even the Slafkovsky one was even, like, say, a legitimate storm. Like, it was like he had to weather a little bit of a media storm. If they trade for Jonathan Huberdeau with that contract, being who he is, the language he speaks, where he's from, all of that combined, if he doesn't perform, it's going to be soul-crushing pressure. It's just going to be massive, massive daily reminders of how you're not producing and this and that and this. It's not something the Canadiens should even consider touching. Even if they could find a trade fit with the Flames, which they probably couldn't, that contract and just those circumstances is a big flat no from me.
Yeah, and I think that the argument of Huberdeau from a hockey standpoint to Montreal, you could make sense. He's a great player. I think that he could, he could find his way again in Calgary. He could have been a very good player in Montreal too. But to me, even before his struggles, I think that, and just with all that history in Florida, signing an 8-year contract at $10.5 million a year, when that deal kicks in when you're 30 years old, to me that's right there. It was a non-starter. Very, very few players in the league will get the chance, or in my view would have the benefit of the doubt of signing such a long contract at such a late age, and prove that they're going to be up to that contract. So you mentioned the fact that since he left Florida, it hasn't been the same. Well, that's even more of a reason now. If it was a dubious contract to start with, well, now it looks like real complications, a real headache for the Flames. So, of course, someone from Collier would say, hey, how about Montreal gets him off our shoulders? Yeah, well, I think it's going to be very close to an unmovable contract. Although, I mean, there's been some crazy bad deals who've been moved over the years, but still, it's he's going to have to redeem himself with his play somewhat. to make him slightly more attractive for other teams, but this is such a big ticket, 10.5 million, and he's the first year of an 8-year deal. Man, that's no,
it's a no-go. It's a
no.
no-go. And I think, honestly, Josh Anderson, say what you will, but he hasn't scored goal. Like, I think last night he drew his 14th penalty of the season, leads the NHL. He's been effective. He just hasn't scored. It's not as if they have to dump him. Brendan Gallagher, this is the best we've seen Brendan Gallagher play. I hope he can keep it up for his sake. But Brendan Gallagher is not looking like a $6.5 million player even. He never will. But he's looking like someone who could at least come reasonably close to providing value like that. Like a $4 million player, let's say.
Yeah.
Like he's looked really good, and he looks like a valuable member of this team right now. So it's yes, the Canadiens would love to shed those contracts. I think under the right circumstances, they would do so. This is not the right. You don't shed those contracts for a worse contract. That's really not the way you should go about it. So
no, exactly. I'd rather keep that money and add a couple of millions more and invest on players that. Seem to be like they're still players. On the upswing.
Well, and invest on players that they're going to have to sign. Like, let's not forget, like these rookies, these young players. We talked about Guhle and Slafkovsky. At some point they're going to need contracts, and as we've seen, these second contracts can be very pricey, depending on what happens between now and then, obviously. But Canadiens can't just be loose with their money. They do still have carry price on their books. It's not adding a second $10.5 million a year player who at least would be playing, but would not be playing at that level. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No. I'll just add that just for William Nylander's sake, that the public transport system in Montreal is quite nice. You could get accustomed to the REM.
Yeah,
he would like it. All right. All right. Thanks, everybody, for sending us your questions. Little reminder that you can send them on our Twitter account. On our Twitter, the handle is Basu and Godin. And the email address is not that much more complicated, basuandgodin@gmail.com. So that wraps it up for today. We're going to be back on Friday with our Prospect Friday with a few games also that'll be added. We just talked about the Calgary Flames. They're going to be in town on Tuesday, so that's going to be interesting to see. There's going to be also a return game, if we can use the soccer term, with Vegas in town later on in the week, and then the Canadiens will wrap it up on Saturday night, visiting the Boston Bruins, another return game, this time at the TD Garden. So, Arpin, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. Have a great week, everyone. Talk to you on Friday.